It's always a pleasure for us to team up with the Council of the Americas on this event. This is something that's very near and dear to my heart. And I have the pleasure of introducing Susan Segal, the CEO of the Council of the Americas, who took, this vision and has really made an amazing impact in the region. I remember when we started out that we were a group of women in New York, and now this series of discussions has created a networking opportunity and a connectivity group for thousands of women throughout the Americas. So I owe a debt of gratitude to my good friend Susan Segal. Susan, come on up. Thank you.
Tell Patty's taller than I am. But I owe the debt of gratitude to Patty because, number one, she's been such an amazing partner for me personally and for the council and for this initiative, because this initiative is all about role models, and I can think of no more amazing role model than Patty. So Patty, thank you so much. So, as usual, everybody wrote some opening remarks for me, and I'm going to semi-ignore them. Today's focus is diversity as a driver of growth. But as I was on the plane coming down here yesterday, I got a little update on my iPhone and realized that yesterday was Gender Pay Equality Day. And that started me thinking. And the reason that yesterday was Gender Pay Equality Day was because April 2nd, and 4 months or 3.5 months into the calendar year, was the amount of time it took a woman today to basically reach pay parity with her male counterpart. Now that's on average, it's not all women. And I started to think, wow, when I started working 40 years ago, I was probably paid 50% less than my male counterparts. But you don't focus today on the disparity that still exists between women's pay and their male counterparts' pay in the workplace today. And that made me start to think again about another topic which is so important, which is something I think a lot about on some of the boards that I'm on, particularly Scotiabank, where we have a huge amount of transparency at the board level, which is the only way to solve, which is what the UK is trying to do, this pay disparity is through disclosure of numbers and complete disparity and complete transparency in what men and women are actually making in terms of salary and bonus and total compensation. Now, why is that so important when we come together in a women's hemispheric network? Well, that's so important because, in fact, it's all part of the same dialogue. It's about keeping women in the workforce, and if you want to keep women in the workforce, you have to empower them, but you also have to, and you have to mentor them, but you also have to make space for them to be compensated at the same level as men. And you also have to have this dialogue with men and women, because the men have to be at the table for two reasons. Number one, because they need to support it within the companies that they work on. But number two, and something that Patty has at her home, and luckily, is men have to be engaged in the home and helping to allow women to broaden what they do and not in the traditional space, just stay home. So our dialogue started to be an all-women's dialogue, but it's clear that this is in dialogue among men and women in the workplace. It's a dialogue between men and women at home. And so we are really excited to have started this network almost 8 years ago. And we have had 37 different events in 10 cities, including our annual conferences in New York. We've had over 3,500 participants and over 115,000 views on YouTube and 76,000 live and on-demand views on our webcast. I can't totally tell you what the impact's been, but when we go back to many countries and many places, we hear a lot of women talking about the networks that they've created post events like this. And we hope that you will do that today. And I encourage all of you to join the conversation in Pound Women ASCOA. Now, I also want to thank Goldman Sachs, who is the sponsor of this event. We are so pleased to be able to partner with an organization that believes and supports so many different women's initiatives, and we're willing to work with all of you as well in many different ways. So again, I want to thank Greenberg. I particularly want to thank Patty, and I want to thank Alex, who is here someplace. Alex! And I want to thank Nancy for really getting behind this and organizing it, and everyone on the team here. Today we've got really lots of fun, and I want to now invite Patty, because we're going to start with a conversation, a fireside chat with Patty and Mónica Gil, of NBCUniversal Telemundo Enterprises, and I'm going to turn the floor over to them. Thank you all for joining us.
So thank you. I have the privilege of getting a chance to do a fireside chat with Mónica, one of the most accomplished women in her organization and in her profession. She's currently the Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer for NBC Universal Telemundo Enterprises. In her role, she's the key executive driving the company's reputation, their brand, their corporate identity, which is really important, thinking that this cause is really important to her because it's a way to further intertwine our cause in such a strong organization like NBC. Additionally, she is responsible for marketing and corporate affairs, which includes communication, publicity, corporate social responsibility, and government. So government affairs, like as if there was nothing in today's environment. Yeah, throw in a government affairs there. Everything's well in the world. So you've clearly had an amazing career, and you have had a huge impact on a number of things. And recently, you were the leader of a special forum that you did for your company on focusing on advancing from women. But before we get to a little bit about what the company is doing, you've had an amazing career path. So can you tell us a little bit about your story, how this came about, and what
Sure.
tips you have?
Thank you, Patty, and thank you all of you. Thank you, Susan. Let me start off by saying I know it's hard to get here in the morning, so I know you guys got here in the morning. Thank you so much for making it on time and fighting that traffic. So, Patty, thank you again. You know, when I heard about this forum, it was really important for me because I always thought how great it is to be in front of a group of women and those few good men that are here as well, because I think we have such a shared interest. In my entire career, I am, just so you all know, I'm the youngest of 12 kids. I am Mexicana. I was born and raised in Santa Barbara, so I lived in a household where there was always a lot of people in my home. That being said, the idea of collective power, of collectively coming to a decision, was something that was always very common for me. So I grew up in California. My mom was a homemaker. My father was a gardener. And quickly you learn what you have and what you don't have. Being raised in Santa Barbara community, which is quite affluent, you really start to understand the differences between communities and markets. So for me, that was always what I think was my call to action. I felt that I had a desire to always try to get some type of justice in my life, whatever justice meant to me at that time. And I quickly knew that I had to do one thing, which was just be a good student. My parents never really taught you how to be a good student. They had a third grade education, so they always wanted me to be a good kid. And I knew that being a good kid was going to get me good grades, hopefully, and I just knew to study. So my theory in life was to work hard, do my work diligently, and sign my name proudly. That catapulted me. I went to Berkeley. I did my undergrad at Berkeley, my master's at USC. And from then, I took a career path where I met a guy who was running for mayor of Los Angeles, and I ended up working for Villaraigosa, for Antonio Villaraigosa, the first Latino mayor in California in 100 years. So I was his press secretary there. And the idea of being connected to press at the time, where you had a candidate that everybody wanted to speak to, was my immediate jump into media. I did media for a while, and then I went into policy to try to do campaigns that were about how do you get healthy healthcare for underprivileged homes. I worked at an ad agency. I did a stint at community affairs at the local station. And then I took the job of my career at the time, which was I went to Nielsen. I think all of you guys are familiar with the Nielsen ratings. And there I was able to really talk about the purchasing power of the Hispanic community, multicultural communities, segments, women's, mom. And I started understanding the power of metrics and data and how data needs to be properly used in everything that we do. Because at the end of the day, if it can't be measured, it really doesn't have the same value. So I launched a number of reports there that were truly talking about the value, the purchasing power of all these different segments. And I had always been very attracted to Telemundo and what was going on with the market right now, this kind of new wave of what Hispanic media should be. So I came here with the decision that we really wanted to redefine Hispanic media in the market. So in a nutshell, that's been my career.
Wow, there's so much to go on. When you talk about, redefining the market, what do you mean by that? And how does that fit into your sense of justice and your commitment to the development of women?
So I always felt that Spanish language media had been seen as an other. And growing up as an immigrant, you always are an other, no matter what. You feel it where you walk into a room, you feel it in your classrooms where you're the only person, in my case, with brown hair. So I had always grown with this concept of it, and I just knew it wasn't right. I knew that Spanish language was a way to help so many residents navigate through processes and systems which are foreign or new. And Telemundo, or Spanish language in general, had an opportunity to create a path for their, not only to survive in this country, but to thrive in it as well. So when I saw kind of what was happening with the space, I think many of you guys know Cesar Conde, our chairman of the company. I had been seeing him do a number of conversations about really talking about the power of media, but it wasn't talking about Hispanics as media. It was talking about that this is the consumer that is going to grow your business. So when we came here, I wanted to make sure that the perception of Latinos are seeing us as we are, and not as past perceptions have expected us to be or behave. That means that we are purchasing, we are homemakers, we are lawyers. Look at all of you in the room. We are now becoming judges. We really are changing the conversation about who this market is. And we had an opportunity because we had an investment from a large company, meaning Comcast, that was providing a brand new building, and you walk in that building, and that building is the future of the workforce. It is technology. It is a new workspace. And it truly is what I like to think the mainstream. So for me, having the opportunity to bring our audience in the conversation of mainstream and not an other, but also the one that's going to grow your business, was incredibly important for me. We started doing a number of things, changing the way that we did our content. We started filling in a void. I think for many years, which has worked, a lot of the competitors had done the typical telenovelas where poor girl meets rich guy, his mom hates her, and then they kiss after 100 episodes. We knew that our audience, it works, and I'm not knocking it because it works, and I watched Topacio and all those other ones, but I knew that there was a void. Yeah, Topacio was back in the day, right? So I'm aging myself, yeah. But we knew that there was a void, and we wanted, again, to make sure that this void was being filled, and Telemundo had the chance to do that.
So you've done a lot in a short time period for all the things that you have accomplished. If you had to go back, what would you do it differently? Because, being Latina or Hispanic in the U.S. and achieving what you have done is no easy feat. And being a woman, even more difficult. So what tips do you have for somebody to excel the way you have? And if you had to go back, what would you do differently?
So there's so much that I would do differently, and I still do differently, and I'm still learning in the organizations that I deal with. I think if I'm to just go back in the general, the way that I learned the most was being in politics. In politics, I was in a room with 7 different men who were strategists, and one thing I learned, they don't take things personally. They could cuss each other out. 5 minutes later, they're like, hey, let's go to lunch. And I didn't know how to deal with that. What I realized is being a woman, nobody teaches us, they teach us what books tell you, but nobody teaches how to behave in the workforce or how to deal with conflict. So I think for me, one of the things that I would initially start with is understanding what the rules of the game are. I don't think I ever knew what the rules of the game in an organization were. I kind of was just grateful to have a job. And I got in and I said, you know what, I'm glad I got in. I thought my smarts would get me there. But at the end of the day, you have to know the rules of the game. You have to know how the game is played and what's going on in the politics between your organization and the competitive landscape. That's one. I think the other thing that I would have done early in my career is I would have traveled outside of California much earlier. I think because of our situations, our families, and just the way we grew up, when people offer you a job, the growth isn't always going to happen in your home. So had I think, left earlier in my career, whether even had been New York, I mean, my family, we're from California, if I had left to Los Angeles, they think I'm going to another country. You think I'm here in Miami, they think I'm like on another continent. So I think that part of it is helping other women understand if there's an opportunity outside of your area, take it. Because especially now, you're connected. You have FaceTime. You have all these things. There's no reason not to. And the reason I would do that is because it gives you, and especially if you have a chance to go into another country, it gives you a global palette. And by that, I mean truly understanding what's going on in the rest of the world. We're so insular at times that you need to be able to have a conversation about what's going on in Russia, about what's going on in Europe with Brexit. You just need to be able to have these conversations because other people in your space are having it. I think the other thing that I would do is I had been in the social space for a long time, and I didn't build a financial acumen at the proper time. And really understanding EBITDA and business, at the end of the day, they care about your shareholders. And you have to be able to make sure that you understand how to run a P&L, and you have to know that space. And I think I got into that way too late. And the other thing I would say, and I could go on this, the one thing is I could be very clear, I would have been doing public speaking much earlier in my life. If you can't get in front of an audience and present, then your chances for growth are limited. You have to be able to present and get in front of a group because you will always be tested on how people perceive you, and that's incredibly important. And people don't talk about that, but if you can't do a presentation, you will not be looked at the same.
That's a challenge. Well, that's very interesting. Given your role, because you have so many roles and you have one in an HR function,
Yeah.
What is your philosophy on recruitment, all other things equal between, assuming an even playing field between men and females?
Yeah, so I just jumped into the added HR into my scope. Recruitment to me is you still have to get the best candidate no matter what. At the end of the day, you will have people that are smart because you're running a business. One of the mistakes I did in the past, and I say this, there's another side to this, is that I would always hire young women that reminded me of me, and I thought, oh, well, maybe they don't have it there yet, but they'll get there. So I was always trying to make sure that I was doing that very nurturing piece of it. Not to say it's a bad thing, but I think it was very difficult because I didn't give them any help by doing that. They were not equipped at the time to get the role that they were in, and then they failed in the role. So I think I'm very cognizant about making sure I always get the right person in the role, man or woman. That being said, when it comes to recruitment, you have to have a woman in the mix. If you only bring in people who don't, who look like you, and in many cases men. So for me, it's making sure that there's always a woman in the conversation. You know, guys heard of the Rooney Rule, where you always put a woman in the mix. If there's especially a high-level position. I've just inherited this space, so part of it is truly, I have to start with understanding the metrics across the board, how many women are in leadership positions, or a lot of times I'll hear something like, yeah, but you know, you have women in VP levels and above. I said, yeah, but how many do you have at EVPs? How many do you have at president levels? So it's how do you prepare women to get to those space? When it comes to my philosophy on recruitment, one is understanding the metrics, two is understanding where the pitfalls are. Because I think a lot of times you can look at the space and there'll be a lot in, for example, in PR, but why are they not getting into the tech world? So for me, it's because how we're recruiting. If we're not recruiting correctly, then we have a problem. And the other thing that I see across with men, what they've done really well is men always know what their next job is. They're always looking across and saying, you know what, let's just say Netflix. I want to work for Netflix. So what they'll do is I've noticed this now across my colleagues a lot, they will find all the executives at Netflix and they figure out how to meet with them. So for me, that's one of the learnings I took is I was never looking at my next job. For recruitment on my end, we have to be able to identify those top stellars across the competition and then figuring out how they want to meet with us and providing access to all of our executives. So whether it's myself or all the executive team, because if you really want to recruit the best, you have to put the best in front of them.
Well, that's very encouraging, I think, for many people in the room. I wish your philosophy was shared by many more companies. You brought up an interesting subject about, hiring someone that looks like yourself, which is a little bit what historically has been a ceiling for women, that, the executives that were at the top, there was a lack of role models of women and they tended to hire other people. So it's ironic that we continue doing that. But you've learned from it and you said, I'm going to do this, which is something that I think others have not been so enlightened. And in that process, you're able to self-assess, like, these are the things I needed to do, this is the things that I would have done differently. Now that you are on the receiving end of requests, what mistakes do you see women make? Now with all your experience, having gone through the whole thing at such a young age with so much success, now that you're sitting back and you're judging the people that are coming in, what are their biggest mistakes and what are the things that really impress you?
I think let me start off with what really impresses me. What always impresses me is I had one candidate, not a couple of years back, where I had gone through and I already knew who I was going to hire. I was convinced that this is the woman I'd hire. And I just ended up taking this one last minute because I said, oh, you know what, she seems interesting, let me do the interview. She came in with a complete portfolio of all her work. She had already anticipated the next steps. She had researched our company, and think about it, I was ready to hire and make the offer to someone else. This woman switched my thinking. She became one of the best talent I've ever hired in my life. But because she came in with a portfolio of a landscape of what to do next, she solved my problem for the future, not for now. So I think I always look at somebody who can anticipate the next big thing or the next so what. That's critically important. I can read a room in 30 seconds. Yes, all of you can here. And by that I mean is if they don't have emotional or intelligence or demonstrate sound judgment, it's a non-starter for me. And you know it the minute you walk in and the minute you have a conversation. Emotional intelligence is so much more important than what school you went to, than truly sometimes your experience. Because if you can't work in the space that you're in and understand the EQ of the room, you're going to struggle. So there's space for everybody. What I still see mistakes that women do, I think, as I've seen in the course of the last few years, we don't ask for what we want. We get mad when we don't get it, but we don't ask for what we want. So let's say there's a position coming up and you hear about it you're waiting for, I always tell people, if you're waiting for me to manage your career, then you're going to be waiting your entire time. So if you want something, tell me that you want it. Because I think sometimes as a bosses, you're so busy and you do want to help people, but you're so busy that it could just, se te pasa la mente, no, right? So I think if somebody tells you they want it, then I'm going to be much better about helping them get there. And if they're not there, I say, okay, look, this is the 5 things you need to do to get to the next position. And we'll connect every 6 months on that. That's one. The other thing is I see a lot of women say, hey, you know, I need a mentor. Can you be my mentor? That, when somebody asks me to be a mentor, it's tough because it has to be organic, right? I've always have a theory that if somebody wants that, I'll give them 30 minutes, 20 minutes of the time, but they don't keep the relationship. And if they want the mentorship, it's not on me to give them the, you know, it's on them to keep the relationship. So sometimes I think they're expecting me to do that. And I think that doesn't work in their favor. The other thing that I've seen is the sexy doesn't go to work. It just doesn't. And I say this because, unfortunately, I still see so many women do this. You can be fashionable, you can be trendy, but if you dress a certain way, you're going to be perceived a certain way. And I can't tell you, unfortunately, how much I still see that. The other thing I would say is I think I still see women cry at work. I'm not saying there's not, I cry once, just don't cry twice, 3, 4 times. But I think that what happens is when they're judged on it. And as much as I wish it was different, they're judged on it. We are judged on it. So I think I try to do my best to maintain my emotions. But at the same time, I think it's still things that hold us back. Very raw conversation, but I think this is real.
Very, very good advice. Very, very good advice. I like the way you said that. I may quote that sexy doesn't come to work. And I always say there's no crying in law. Like, you can't cry because it's happened a lot. Like, you can't cry. There's no crying in law.
Or I always say, if you're going to cry, come in front of me. Don't cry in front of your boss.
Yeah. So I want to open it up. I know we're running out of time, and I have a couple more questions that I had, but I want to open it up to the audience for questions. Do you have any questions?
Morning.
Would you mind introducing yourself and standing up?
Yes, thank you. Good morning. Ana Maria Gonzalez from Citibank, Talent and Diversity for LATAM. No, I was wondering if you can share with us some of what you have seen in terms of the evolution from a communication strategy perspective of how women are perceived, or what is the work done in terms of how we position women from a media standpoint of view, if you have seen an evolution in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Me Too movement has really changed everything for women. I think it's forced the men to rethink the conversation around women. At least I've seen the evolution is that now more men are talking about women's issues. I think from a media perspective, for example, I'm not a fan of the word empowerment, of women's empowerment. And the reason I say that is because I think empowerment means that women, they have to be given the power to do something. If you think about it, we all have our own power. So the reason I think that the media perspective hasn't done us any favors by talking about women's empowerment as if it's something we didn't have. For me, women's empowerment is useless if it doesn't lead to a change. So I think that from a media perspective, I don't like that it's been focused on women's empowerment. It really needs to be focused on what we bring to the table. And the reality is that, and all of you have seen it, we come in, and I just saw Susan, you took the mic, you fixed it, you made it work for you immediately. You just took charge. Women, all of you do that every single day. You take charge. And what you do is you fix processes, you fix bureaucracy, and you fire, you will give a chance to that woman that failed once and fire the brother-in-law that does repeated mistakes over and over. That's what I want the conversation to be about, how women are growing a business, how women are making much more productive decisions about professionalizing their business or driving results. So I think from a media perspective, I have a big problem with the word empowerment. What we've done as a communications, and Alfredo, our chief communications officers here, is I think it's really important to have women's initiatives, because what it is, it's about access to exposure. So I want the conversation to be about exposure. When they are exposed to the University of Miami groups, when they're exposed to other women that are basically telling them the rules of the game, telling them how to negotiate, talk about pay equity, you don't even know. You don't even know what to ask for. You don't even know when you're going into a job what you're worth. So you're always going to lowball it. So it's really helping people understand those types of rules of the game, I think, is a game changer for us. And if we're not doing it right now, we have to figure out how to do it. We have to bring in a bunch of HR representatives across different organizations and sit here and say, what have you seen? Because for me, the best job that I've had now is sitting in HR, because I see things that I've never seen. Anyhow, it's a long-winded way, kind of I'm going different directions, but I think from a media standpoint, one of the things that we want to do is we have to talk about women every day. Every single day. So whether it's women in leading roles, such as Kate del Castillo, which La Reina del Sur is coming out in the 22nd, but really talking about her, not as a narcotraficante, but as a woman who is running a business. I think it's changing the conversation about women. I think internally as well, it's having a lot of other, I know Sally's here, and you guys are going to be hearing from Sally, Sally Ing's here, Ana Siegel, who as well is propelling them to visibility. So I'm not sure if it's so much about communication versus exposure.
Thank you. Are there any more questions?
I have a slightly different question. So, sure. It's more about the Me Too movement a little bit. And there's been a whole bunch of controversy around Joe Biden.
Right.
And I'll tell you why that scares me. Because, in fact, no one is alleging any kind of sexual misconduct. And if I think back in my career, I can think of thousands of times that some male put his arm around me or, touched my shoulder or whatever. And I can also think, as a woman, gee, have I ever done that with a male? And so one of the things that's got me really thinking about this, are we headed for an inhibiting moment where instead of making it a better and safer workplace for men and women together, we're making it a more challenging workplace where when we need men and women to be mentoring each other and supporting each other and getting them into the networks to go out for drinks or play golf or whatever people do to feel that they're part of the network, that we're going to make it more challenging for that to happen. And I'd love to have your perspective, because you are in the media world, and that's a place where we've seen a lot of this kind of challenge.
Right. Susan, I couldn't agree with you more. I think we're going down a dangerous route. The Me Too movement did what it was supposed to do. It raised the awareness, in my opinion, and I think every one of us have been in a room where we have felt uncomfortable. I remember working for FEMA and being probably 16, and just something in my body and just told me this man was creepy, and I was 16. And I didn't know how to explain it or describe it. I just knew something was wrong. And I remember talking to my boss at that time, and I think I innocently said something, and the next thing I know, this guy was fired. But I remember feeling guilty about it. And I remember telling my boss, did I do something wrong? And he himself kind of said, well, maybe it wasn't that big of a deal. And what I realized at the time is I was always kind of like, oh, maybe it's okay. But I knew, in your body, in your heart, the minute you feel grossed out or creepy from someone, it's real. And at any point, you should, in your workspace, never feel uncomfortable. You should never, if you feel uncomfortable within your workspace, that's a problem. And I think that's what was good about the Me Too movement. Where I think it's a dangerous route is that right now what I'm seeing is men don't know what to do. They don't know whether to touch my hand, whether to hug me, whether to, especially here in Miami, right? They don't know what to do. So I think part of it is, one is the vibe that I give off of people. I'm much more aware of it. I do think there has to be a kind of a personal space boundary. And I think that we should talk about personal space boundaries, but we have to be careful that we're not immediately, I think, you have to get to the root of it. I do think men sometimes don't know what they don't know. So I don't know what Biden's situation was in terms of whether he knew or not, but now it's got to be a teachable moment for him. And men have to lead this conversation more than women. I don't think it's about women leading this conversation. If we're really going to get to a middle ground, and all the men here in the room, I'm looking at you guys, it's truly important that you are having this conversation, that you're bringing your senior leadership women in the room and saying, hey, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Is this, the conversation, in my opinion, has to be led by men. Otherwise, it's a dangerous route. They're not going to hire us, you guys. They're not going to hire us. They're not going to know what to do, or they're going to hire us as tokens.
You're absolutely correct. Well, thank you. You bring a very interesting perspective because you've seen it from a number of angles, and we thank you. And I'm sure after this, you're going to have lots of people asking you to mentor them. So be careful. And now they know they have to follow up. So be careful.
You have to go to Telemundo Center for that, though. So I welcome you all to Telemundo Center. Thank you so much.
But thank you so much.
Thank you.